Russia's indomitable air defenses aren't looking so strong anymore. Ukraine has punched so many holes in Russia's defenses that we should start calling them Swiss cheese. And now Ukraine is eating that cheese for breakfast. At least its drones are. Every hole in Russia's air defenses is a catastrophe for Putin, as he watches his country utterly fail to prevent Ukraine's mid- and deep-range strike drones from doing their damage. Ukraine is now the king of the skies. With every hole that is punched, Russia's air defense problems are only getting worse, and 2026 alone has proven just how bad Russia's defenses truly are at stopping Ukraine's most dangerous weapons. Russia's air defenses are being taken out by the very weapons that they're supposed to stop. On June 29th, Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, or USF, took to X to reveal some shocking statistics. Since the beginning of 2026, the USF alone has managed to strike 194 elements of Russia's integrated air defense systems. Elements is a pretty nebulous term, but we can assume that it covers everything from air defense systems themselves, such as S-300s and Pantsirs, through to the radars that supply those systems with information that they need to properly target incoming threats. What this amounts to is an average monthly air defense destruction count of a little over 32, which means that Ukraine is taking out at least one Russian air defense unit every single day. This is terrible for Russia. It shows that the drones that have already been devastating Putin's forces are becoming ever more effective against the air defense systems which should be shooting them out of the sky. The numbers for June alone are bad enough, and they prove that we're not too far off with the average. The USF managed to destroy 31 Russian air defense targets in June alone, signifying a deeper push into the Russian rear that has massive ramifications not only for Russia itself, but all of the territory that Putin's patsies have occupied in Ukraine. And as a final nail in the coffin of the Russian air defense myth, the USF revealed that its total count for destroyed Russian air defense systems since its June 11, 2025 formation now stands at 276. That's an interesting number. If we subtract the 194 destroyed during the first 6 months of 2026 from the 276 total, that gives us 82 air defense elements destroyed during the latter half of 2025. We told you that Ukraine has been escalating its air defense campaign, and this is the proof. The number of air defense elements that the USF has taken out during the first 6 months of 2026 is almost 2.4 times higher than the number it destroyed during the final 6 months of 2025. Oh, and one more thing. These are just the USF's figures. There will be other Ukrainian units that are targeting Russia's air defenses, so even the insanely high numbers that the USF shared don't cover all of Putin's air defense woes. How could things get any worse for the Swiss cheese that has become Russia's layered air defenses? The answer is easy. It's not just these systems that the USF has shattered. The air defense elements covered by the figures we've shared so far account for Russia's main air defense network. We're talking about the S-300s and S-400s that are supposed to guard dozens of square kilometers of territory, and the radar systems that should detect threats from potentially hundreds of kilometers away. But the USF has been destroying more than these headline-grabbing pieces of equipment. On top of everything else, the USF reports 426 mobile radar systems and 3,838 of Russia's mobile electronic warfare, or EW systems, have fallen victim to USF drones. These types of systems aren't designed to protect major targets. They're typically used for the likes of fuel depots, logistical hubs, and similar smaller targets that Russia tries to conceal behind the lines. EW systems in particular are among Russia's most important defensive tools, as they can send incoming drones off course by jamming or otherwise interfering with GPS signals. But even they are falling prey to Ukraine's drones, and every single one of these more localized systems that goes down opens up more opportunities to take out key Russian assets dozens of kilometers behind the front. This is a nightmare scenario for Russia. What we're seeing here is the collapse of an air defense network that was supposed to be impenetrable, and even Russia knows it. The entire nation is feeling the effect of the failure of its air defenses. 89 different regions across the country and in the occupied territories are now being impacted by fuel shortages, which are being caused by a combination of Ukraine's non-stop strikes against Russian refineries that are supposed to be protected by air defense systems, and its attacks on fuel trucks that EW and localized radars can no longer protect. We get the clearest indication of Ukraine's brilliant strategy from its attack on the Slavyansk oil refinery, which Ukraine hit on June 28th and had been burning for 2 days by the time RBC Ukraine reported on the strike on June 29th. That refinery, which is about 300 kilometers away from Ukraine's border and has a capacity of 5.2 million tons, accounts for about 9% of oil refining in Russia's southern federal district. Ukraine just keeps on hitting this refinery. April 27th saw a strike, so did May 19th, and now Ukraine has hit it again on June 28th. This is starting to become a monthly tradition for Ukraine. The Slavyansk oil slaughter. And Russia can't do anything about it, because the refinery's perimeter is so massive that it isn't possible to install enough air defense systems to deal with the swarms of Ukrainian drones coming from different directions. It's a microcosm of a problem that Russia now faces all over. It's too big to defend itself, and Ukraine is stretching the defenses that Russia does have thinner every time the USF takes out another air defense element. Russia is learning the harsh lesson that so many of its allies have been learning over the past few months. Russian air defenses simply aren't good enough. Cast your mind back to late February and early March. You may remember this period as the time when the US launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran. For years, Iran had been building up an air defense network made up primarily of Russian air defense systems, or its own copies of those systems and air defenses purchased from China. And what did this massive network of Iranian defenses achieve? The sum total of nothing when faced with the enormous barrage of missiles and bombs that the US and Israel unleashed during the early part of Operation Epic Fury. As Army technology pointed out at the time, the US and Israel achieved almost immediate air superiority over Iran. By the beginning of April, US Central Command was claiming that about 80% of Iran's entire air defense network had been knocked out. All the country had left was mobile launchers. Russian S-300s and other defenses were rendered useless and then destroyed. We saw something similar, albeit on a much smaller scale, in Venezuela. When the US captured Nicolas Maduro, it did so on the back of Russian-made S-300 and Buck M2 air defenses. Those defenses, much as they would later in Iran, utterly failed to stop American missiles from tearing through Caracas and setting the stage for Maduro's capture. Now what Ukraine is doing to Russia's air defenses is different. The Russian systems are the same, but the weapons that they're failing to stop are different. Ukraine, and especially the USF, is using drones rather than missiles. Still, we see similarities. Russian air defenses can't stop the weapons they're supposed to stop. And as Ukraine manufactures more deep and mid-range strike drones, it's able to use a swarming strategy to overwhelm Russia's air defenses, enabling strikes both against those defenses and the targets they're supposed to protect, which is somewhat reminiscent of the shock and awe campaign we saw in Iran. However, Russia's big problem is this. Its air defenses simply aren't built to deal with USF drones. These defenses were built to deal with missiles. They do a bad enough job at that, but they struggle even more when facing drones that their radars struggle to detect, track, and engage. This isn't a Russia-centric problem. Though its air defenses systems may pale in comparison to modern Western systems, technologically speaking, both Russian and Western systems are designed to combat aircraft and missiles, which are larger, faster, and fly much higher than the drones that Ukraine unleashes. A drone can remain below the line of sight of a ground-based radar system until the drone is so close that it can unleash a payload against that radar or its associated system before a missile can even be fired off. And let's talk about those air defense missiles for a moment. They're expensive. Drones aren't. So even if a Russian air defense system manages to track a drone, some calculus has to be done. Is it worth expending a missile that may cost hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of dollars, to destroy a drone that costs a fraction of that amount? The answer would be yes if Ukraine only sent the occasional drone. When there are swarms of dozens or hundreds, the battlefield calculus doesn't add up. It's simply too expensive for Russia to use its air defense network to stop Ukraine's drones. Not that this matters all too much when those systems are getting destroyed where they stand. So Ukraine has turned Russia's air defenses into Swiss cheese. Those defenses have collapsed, and Ukraine now rules the skies in large portions of the occupied territories, as well as being capable of striking targets in Russia over and over. But what does all of this mean for Russia? And why can't Russia do anything to solve the problems? We'll answer those questions right after this reminder that you are watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this comes from, so hit subscribe and ring the notification bell if you're getting value from our channel. Russia's Swiss cheese defenses are a problem, because every air defense system, radar, or EW device the USF destroys creates a gap for other drones to exploit. It's almost like Ukraine's drones are waiting in the wings, ready to pounce as soon as the USF takes out the only things that would have a chance to stop them. We've seen that in Slavyansk, though in that case, the facility was so large that the gaps were already there. But the USF has plenty more examples. Between June 27th and 29th, the USF took out an array of targets in the occupied territories, all of which were made possible by its campaign against Russian air defenses. In Crimea, the USF destroyed a Pantsir S-1 air defense system along with a pair of radars, an ST-68 and a 48YA-6 K-1 Podlyok. There's a nice bit of synergy there. Air defense systems had to be destroyed to allow Ukraine to take out even more. Other targets hit during those 3 days of destruction included fuel tank rail cars in Crimea. In Zaporizhia, the 412th Nemesis Brigade destroyed a pair of Russian fuel tanks, along with a facility that Russia used to store lubricants. Operators of the 3rd Battalion of the 414th Magyar's Birds Brigade took out a different fuel tanker in the same sector. And drones that were flown into Russia's Bryansk region took out a train that Russia was using to support its troops near the border with Ukraine. Head over to Kherson, where Ukraine's 20th Separate Unmanned Systems Brigade destroyed a harbour tug that was yet another cog in Russia's massive logistical network. That's what the loss of so many of Russia's air defences makes possible. Gap after gap is created. Ukraine targets air defences that are either directly guarding the targets it wants to hit, or are covering aerial corridors through which it wishes to send drones. With the defences down, the pathways open, and Ukraine strikes. Over and over and over again. All of these strikes occurred over the course of 3 days. In 2026 as a whole, we've seen Ukraine massively ramp up both its mid- and deep-range strike strategies, and it's all due to the collapse of Russia's air defences. At the beginning of June, Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov reported that Ukraine had doubled its number of successful strikes being carried out over 50 kilometers beyond the front lines in May when compared to April. That doubling was part of a consistent increase that has been happening since the start of 2026. On June 22nd, the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, reported that Ukraine was on track to match its May total of 210 intermediate-range strikes against Russia. By the time of the ISW's report, Ukraine was at 145 for June. We don't have the final tally for the month yet, but it's almost certain to be in the 200-plus region. It's not like Russia is doing much better on the deep strike front either. UNM reports that June saw Ukraine hit 11 different oil refineries and 8 military plants inside Russia, several of them multiple times. We've also seen Ukraine target facilities in and around Moscow, which is meant to be the single most well-defended region in all of Russia. Thank the Swiss cheese for all of this. The USF punched the holes, then it, along with other Ukrainian drone forces, shoved unmanned aerial vehicles right through them. Of course, Crimea is at the center of all of this. As impressive as the strikes inside Russia and the other occupied territories are, most of what Ukraine's drone forces are doing right now serves the wider strategy for isolating Crimea and wresting the illegally annexed peninsula out of Putin's control. So much of what Ukraine is hitting now in and around Crimea has been made possible by the USF and its campaign against Russian air defenses. The Kerch Strait crossing and the ferries that Ukraine has taken out there may not have been struck otherwise. Ukraine's campaign to destroy fuel trucks heading into Crimea is working because Russia's air defense network is so full of holes that mid-range strike drones can fly through large portions of the occupied territories unimpeded. Add all of that to the fact that these air defenses were never built to deal with drones in the first place, and you get a recipe for disaster that is being shoved right down the throats of the Crimean occupiers. A state of emergency has been declared in the Crimean city of Sevastopol as Ukraine's drones strike and the peninsula suffers from a fuel crisis. All of this has been built up over months of the USF destroying Russian air defenses. But somehow Russia has even bigger problems. It's not just that the USF is destroying air defense systems by the hundreds, or that those systems aren't even designed to deal with what Ukraine is sending Russia's way. The much worse issue for Russia is that it can't even fill the holes in the cheese. Every hole that Ukraine punches is either there for good or can only be filled by Russia punching a new hole somewhere else. And the reason why is that Russia can't get its hands on any more air defense systems. The Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, describes Russia's air defenses as threadbare in a June 3rd article. It pointed to Ukraine's drone strike in St. Petersburg, which occurred on that very day, noting that at least 50 of Ukraine's drones had been able to arrive, circle around, and then strike a range of targets that included a Russian corvette and oil storage tanks. Russia still relies too heavily on EW when Ukraine has AI-powered drones that can overcome these types of systems, CEPA argues. Bureaucracy, combined with the need to keep shifting a limited number of air defense systems around, is contributing to the gaps that we see, just as much as Ukraine's drones. Ukraine's persistence and gradual scaling of its drone assaults have exposed the weaknesses in Russian defenses, and Russia is far too behind the technological times to do all that much about it. Russia can't even build more of its existing air defense systems. At least it can't build at a scale even close to Ukraine's rate of system and radar destruction. The commander of Ukraine's 413th Unmanned Systems Regiment, who goes by the call sign Charger, says that Russia can't get its hands on the microchips that it needs for its missiles and radars. Because it's a scarce resource, it's very expensive, and even if they just throw a sack of dollars at the manufacturer, air defenses won't just materialize because there's no microchips. There is no device where you feed it money and it gives you a microchip that controls an anti-aircraft missile, Charger says. Russia can thank the gradual impact of Western sanctions for that one. It's not impossible for Russia to get its hands on the chips it needs, but those chips can rarely be purchased directly, leaving Russia to pay third countries over the odds for chips that take longer to arrive due to having to be sent all over the world so that Russia can skirt sanctions. The issue, combined with the sheer size of Ukraine's drone swarms, also means that Russia is now running low on air defense missiles. That's according to CBS News, which reported on June 17th that Russia is already dealing with a shortage of S-300 missile interceptors, and that this shortage may soon extend to other air defense systems. So even when the USF isn't blowing those systems up with drones, many aren't even loaded with enough missiles to stop a swarm. And when you combine all of this with the sheer size of Russia, and the additional need to protect the occupied territories, you get why CIPA called Russia's air defense network threadbare. There wasn't enough to go around before, and there's even less after the USF devastated Russia's defenses. And so the Swiss cheese has been made. The USF will carry on punching holes, of course. This is no time for complacency. What we're going to see as we move into the second half of 2026 is much more of what we've seen during the first half of the year. Refineries, air defenses, logistics, troop gatherings, and so much more are reachable like never before. And as Putin focuses all of his efforts on a frontline campaign that's going poorly, Ukraine will keep whittling away, leaving the Russian rear defenseless. An even bigger aerial storm is coming for Russia, and it's not like what Russia has absorbed so far in 2026 was particularly small. Ukraine has already unleashed a strike storm so massive that it blocked out the sun in Russia. 800,000 targets have been taken down in 2026 alone, as Ukraine continues to reshape the battlefield. Find out more by checking out our video. And if you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to ensure that you see more of our videos covering the breakdown of Russia at Ukraine's hands. And thank you, as always, for watching.